Okay, so I'm Elizabeth Wesley Casella, and why am I here and why am I qualified to talk about this? I'm the founder and CEO of L12 Services Corporation, and we're an internal communications and organizational development firm. We've been around for about 14 years, and we've been dealing with engagement, collaboration, and internal comms for almost that entire time. People weren't necessarily talking about internal communications that long ago, but that's the work that we've been doing. If you look at our website or our logo, it says that we facilitate operational excellence. And that's really a way of describing the fact that we look at workflow, process, and culture through an internal comms lens. I'm going to be sharing not only the slides with you today, but I'm also going to be sharing a number of tools and assets with you, and I will go over them during the presentation. But just be aware that at the very end of the presentation, there's a slide with a QR code where you can immediately download the information. But we'll follow up with an email giving you a link to this recording, as well as the opportunity to use a link if that's easier for you rather than playing with your phone. So without further ado, we're going to just roll into this thing and see how far we can get and how much we can get done as a group today. So welcome to the Collaborative Advantage, transforming your business operations. What we're going to discuss today is, of course, why we're here. Your challenges, your concerns and impediments, and why they matter. I really want to say a specific thank you to everybody who completed the pre-event survey. It was helpful in helping me organize the information and really understand what challenges you have facing you, and provide some actionable tips that you'll be able to take out of today's presentation. And then we're going to go into communication solutions. I'm going to talk you through a framework for your solutions, and that's where I'm going to share the tools that I discussed. We're going to talk about engaging deskless hybrid new workers, which is its own kind of subset of information. And I'll share some proven tools and activities for increasing engagement in those spaces. Then we'll talk about solutions specifically for collaboration and busting silos. Why collaboration matters and activities to increase it. And then we'll get to the Q&A, which is probably the really good stuff. So without further ado, here are the challenges, concerns, and impediments that you shared with me in the pre-event survey. As you can see, I've broken them up into columns. I did some data crunching, and the gold line really indicates the most frequently mentioned or questioned areas that you're dealing with as it relates to this invitation that you all accepted. Communications and strategy, really that talks about what is the framework, how do we build the thing that gets the information out. Communications and informing, that's really about how are we crafting our information in a way that reaches people at their desk, not at their desk, sometimes at their desk. And then the impediments, most all of you mentioned silos as being a problem. So the green ones underneath, I'm hoping that in the future we can deploy some other deeper dives that get into the details of those. But for a first meeting, I think that it makes sense to really talk about the most frequently mentioned areas that you're all facing. So why does all of this matter? I mean, I know I don't need to dig into how it impacts you in your operations because you're here, but you can look at why does collaboration matter? Why does engagement matter? Why does internal comms matter in two different buckets? One of them is operations based. It's how do you get things done? How does it impact the bottom line from a point of view of process and workflow? But the other piece is how do these concepts impact us at a human level? And last month, or maybe the month before that, Gallup came out with their 2023 State of the Global Workplace report. And I encourage you to read it. But one of the things that really stood out to me is that they looked at the idea of engagement, the idea of internal comms and collaboration, and took it into the human side of things. Why does engagement matter? Well, from the human side, as you can see, when people aren't engaged, whether they're in the office, whether they're hybrid, or whether they're deskless, they experience higher levels of stress. They don't feel like they're informed. They don't feel like they're part of the group. And that stress turns into burnout. And we all know that burnout really equates to attrition and low productivity, both of which cost organizations huge amounts of money. So those people that were actively engaged, they felt as though they could contribute more to the organization and they were really part of a team. So the fact that you're here tells me that you understand why it's important both on an operations level and on a human level to keep people feeling part of the team and doing work in a way that doesn't make them feel as though it's chaotic. So if you're trying to make the sale to leadership on why it's important to really focus on engagement or collaboration or internal comms, this is a great statistic to be able to pull out. And it is inside this report. You can get it at gallup.com. Anybody who subscribes to them gets a couple emails a week, so I'm sure you're familiar with that. So let's start out with talking about communication solutions, because communication, engagement, and collaboration are all interdependent. They build on top of each other, but they start out with a framework of how do you communicate internally. For those of you who are professional communicators, I hope you love this George Bernard Shaw quote as much as I do. I use it in almost all of my slide decks, and it makes me giggle a little bit because we've all been there. The myth about communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Oftentimes, new organizations or organizations that aren't specifically focused on how to engage and leverage the institutional knowledge of their teams think about communication as a one-way street. The idea that I want to get to you and then we're done, end of story. But those of us who work in this space realize that communication is actually a two-way street. It's not a one-way street, it's a dialogue. And that is the piece that effectively begins to engage and create collaboration. So this slide alone, I could probably spend about 2 hours on it. I roll it out in my workshops, and they are anywhere from 4 hours to 2 days. This goes pretty deep into how to create internal comms strategy. A couple things that I want to point out about this slide is there are 4 red asterisks on the right-hand side of the slide. This indicates there are specific tools that I'll be talking about next that connect with these activities. The second piece that I want to make sure that you are all super aware of is that internal communications is complex, but it should not be complicated. Internal communications deals with various types of information, various channels, various ways of expressing yourself, and it seems nebulous and squishy, and it seems almost like it should be common sense and easy. Just, I have an idea, I want you to know about it, I'm going to throw it out there. But we all know that that's not the case. The thing about having a professional in the space, either internally or a consultancy like ours, is that our whole job is to take what seems squishy and seems like common sense and make it clear and clean and uncomplicated. Truly, at its essence, internal comms is a beautiful, clean formula. If any of my ASQ friends are here, hopefully you have had the experience that that's the truth. And if any of my ASQ friends are here and going to be in Phoenix next week, I'm speaking at PhoenixCon, and we'll be going deeper into some of this information. The point of all of this is that you can create a formula that you can deploy over and over again, and you can scale with if you understand the steps that you need to take and the concepts that you need to keep front of mind all the time. And the most important concept is understanding team communications needs. Whether you're a small organization and informal, or whether you're a large organization and really formal, and doing a little bit of research on the various groups and businesses that accepted this invitation, we seem to range from anywhere from, I think, 10 people all the way up to about 20,000. That's the size footprint these businesses are. So I want to talk to all of you about this one thing that all of you can do, and that is the most important first step, and that is understanding team communications needs, which means getting curious about your team footprint. Now, you can perform this work to learn more about the communications needs in focus groups or with tools such as Helix Assessment, which we use. But regardless of which tool you use, the point is to learn where on the scale of chaos tolerant to order tolerant your team is. And let me explain why. Actually, first, let me explain order tolerance and chaos tolerance to you. Chaos tolerance means that your team is good to go with just knowing the end game, just knowing the goal and the timeline that it needs to be accomplished, and you just let them run. Kind of like that old phrase, hire good people and let them do good work. They're the people that don't need a lot of guidance. They don't want a lot of guidance. They want to do the choose your own adventure, problem solving process on the way to that goal. On the other end of the spectrum are your order tolerant people. They're the people that part of the definition of success for them is to be doing every step right on the way to that goal. So they need the details. They need the dots connected closely. They need the milestones so that they can check themselves and make sure that they're going in the right direction and doing it in a way that fulfills the needs of leadership. And there's no right or wrong here. It's just a preference and work style. And the reason that we do this is so that we can, or the reason that we gather this data is so that we can understand what the needs are of your organization, and we can craft communication to meet those needs. For example, your chaos tolerant people will never read the long, detailed, many bullet points, step-by-step directive that you give them in email, or the daily stand-up meeting. They won't attend it. That just makes them crazy. They do not want to do it. They feel like it's a waste of time. They know how to get there. They're going to, break all the walls down in order to meet the goal. And that's all that matters. Conversely, if you just send out communications that say, hey, at the end of the year, we want X done, your order tolerant people are going to be paralyzed. It's going to be analysis paralysis. They won't take that first step because they don't know what you expect of them. They don't know what you want at every step of the way. So being able to craft communication, whether it's in writing or it's internal podcasting or it's in graphics and images, infographics, it makes a difference knowing that, so that you can meet people where they're at. And this is the foundational step of creating an internal comms strategy. All of the rest of this builds off of it. Now, if you are that small informal team, you probably only need to go down to row 5. You probably need to make it to the provide a feedback mechanism with legs piece, because designing internal campaigns for 10 people doesn't make sense. And you may or may not use an intranet, and therefore you wouldn't need to create accountability for that type of content management. However, if you are a larger organization with formal communications, all 8 of these rows are probably important to you. And as I said, they build off of each other. For example, assessing and prioritizing your communications channels, meaning that you're looking at and inventorying all of the channels that you have, and you are finding out what is successful with your workforce and getting rid of those that aren't. And then your comms policy builds directly on top of that by explicitly explaining what each comms channel is for, what type of information can go on that. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that into the next slide. Always write with brevity. We have a limited amount of attention span these days. It's interesting, anybody who's my age, Gen X or older, we were all taught that bullet points make for sloppy writing. But today, if you don't write with bullet points, people can't scan. And if they can't scan, they don't read, and you get reply emails that say TLDR, too long, didn't read, which is a bummer because you spent all that time crafting the information and it's not being absorbed. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. As I said, each one of these slides have more detail than I'm going to go into today, but consider this a playbook as we go into additional training where we dive down and do more work in, exactly what providing a feedback mechanism means, or designing messaging campaigns. It would not fulfill everybody's needs if I went deep into all of this in every single slide. However, the high points start with our tools. So here's an information graphic about communications channel best practices. It helps you understand how you can start looking at and assessing the value of each of the communications channels that you have. So, this will help you create consistency and prevent people hunting for information. It'll address the tactical communications needs of your teams, whether they're deskless or hybrid. And it's a great starting point to consider how to develop a layered communication strategy. You can think of all the channels that you have and how they can complement one another as you use them simultaneously for specific messaging campaigns. This is another tool that supports that previous comms channel best practice, and it's just a way of thinking about your communications. The 4 pillars of successful internal communications really, bottom out at what, where, when, and how are you communicating? What types of information are you communicating? What channels do they belong on? When are they communicating? When are you communicating, and how are you communicating? So the what and the where we discussed a little, or I discussed a little bit earlier, but the when applies to those of you with distributed teams, whether it's nationally or internationally, allowing people to understand what the core hours are when they can expect to really interact with those who are working on their project, or that they need to ask questions from, or that they're trying to collaborate with. Understanding when everybody's online or different departments are online is a really great way to facilitate better communication and improved collaboration. And then the how are you communicating? This is kind of a little addressed area, but it's super important because I've seen people fired over the 2 examples I'm going to give you. The first being emoji use. How are you expected to use emojis or not use emojis? Are they something that the organization really frowns upon, or do they accept that use? Do you only use them internally and not externally? Is it okay to use them in both areas? Is it not okay to use them at all? If you have new hires, or you have really excited people who are always jazzed all the time, you may want to clarify what the position is of the organization, whether or not emojis are okay. And then, of course, we've all experienced the problem with all caps. It's hard to understand nuance in written information, so all caps can be kind of confusing. If you get a message that says, "There's pizza in the kitchen again," and it's all caps, do you know if the person is so psyched that there's pizza in the kitchen, or if there's pizza in the kitchen again, and that's like the thing that's going to break their psyche? So you want to make sure that people understand what's expected of them. And this also includes any commitments that you have internally and externally for response times for your organization. This next slide is the first page of a template for internal communications. As you can see, it lists the platforms that are available. It gives the type of information that you share on each platform, and it makes it really clear that email is right for business development or brainstorming or longer conversations that you would want to file down. That text is for emergency and time-sensitive requests to connect, like what's the Zoom link for the meeting in 5 minutes? Again, there is no right or wrong. It depends on how your organization works, but it is nice to build this with that information that you gathered from your teams about their chaos or order tolerance. Maybe that's complemented with a survey or interviews about what platforms are working for your group, or for your geographic hub, or for the way that you work. That can inform your internal comms policy. So it's not decisions being made from leadership about, well, we bought this suite of apps and we think you should use it this way, when actually that doesn't align with the applicable use and the practical use of those who are on those channels all the time. You really want to take that institutional knowledge from your teams and build your policies from that to meet them whenever possible. Again, communications, timing, and distribution, Those are the commitments that you make for, say, Lindsay sends me an email on a Wednesday. Our internal commitment is to respond internally and externally within 48 hours. If Lindsay sends me an email and I'm head down in a project, it's incumbent upon me to, within 48 hours, shoot her a message that acknowledges receipt, saying, I got your email. I'm totally overwhelmed right now. I will reply on Monday. So she's not working under the impression that maybe it got lost in the ether, maybe it's lost in my inbox. She knows that I have it and that I am interested in being able to address it. I just can't do it right now. Again, writing with brevity. Brevity guidelines are important, and these are some easy steps to help you think about how you're writing. It's difficult. It is much harder to write with brevity than it is to explain everything. And right now, we're in kind of a mishmash of styles collectively throughout the business world, where information either is way too detailed or it's produced with brevity, but it's not being produced from the mindset of the reader. So some of the things that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're trying to write with brevity is use this infographic to help guide you in the theory. But as you're writing, before you send it out, put yourself in the position of the person who's receiving the information and see if all of the questions that they might want to ask are answered, or a good number of them. And one of the things that you want to do, whether it's in your newsletter or your email or your single source of truth intranet, is you always want to give a feedback mechanism, something that says, want more info, and then have an assigned link, whether it's an email or a phone number or a specific person that can collect information, questions or suggestions, or maybe somebody wants to volunteer for that initiative that you were writing about. But provide a way for your communication recipients to engage with you. This is one way to break down that silo and to encourage engagement. You're asking people what they want, what they need from you, or how they can become involved. And it's a slow process, but it helps people become more comfortable engaging with the organization. So always make sure that as you're distributing information, could be your internal podcasting, could be your single source of truth, could be your e-blasts, that there's a line at the bottom that says, want more info, want more details, and directs people for a way to connect with you to fulfill their needs. Single source of truth, for those of you who do have one, this is an excellent guideline for how to use it. For those of you who don't have one, this is an excellent source for how to build it. We want you to understand that a single source of truth can be for any size organization. It doesn't need to be for every size organization. It's really important when you have distributed teams and larger organizations to have one place that organizes the information that people can consistently count on in order to find out more information, or to dive in for deeper details, or to see historical information. And your single source of truth is a place for people to find each other and connect with each other and go deeper into organizational awareness. Meaning, if I work in the marketing department and I need to understand what facilities does, I can go to their portal on the intranet, and there is not just the name facilities in the headline, but there's a description of what that work is and what those success metrics are, what makes for successful facilities management, and maybe some area where the key personnel are listed and the jobs or the projects that they work on. Make it easy for your people to learn more about the organization so they are informed and they're aware of who to reach out for when they have questions or they have opportunities for collaboration and projects. So now we're going to step back and do the 35,000 foot view. If you're putting together your internal communications to establish better collaboration and higher engagement, there are really 3 areas of focus to start building from: planning, strategic design, and execution. And as you can see, I highlighted the learn how your team needs to receive communication in the planning phase, because that is the most important step, followed by assessing your channel and platform efficacy, and then followed by creating a content calendar, especially if you are large enough to engage in messaging campaigns. This assures that the people receiving your information, again, it's not only in writing, it might be in videos or internal podcasting. This helps you create a messaging campaign that doesn't overwhelm people, that utilizes all of your different channels and starts to create that layered internal comm strategy, which takes us directly down to strategic design. Looking at the communication channels and platforms that you have and creating a layered internal comm strategy goes hand in hand with that content calendar. The purpose for doing this is that not only do you want to make sure that you have the annual messages that always go out plotted, like benefits enrollment or the goals for the organization for the year, but you also have room for those things that pop up during the year, and you have the resources available to deploy your messaging correctly. Are you using all of the channels to the best of their use? Are the messages that you're sending out on each channel all similar with the same root message that you want to deploy? Your content calendar and your layered internal comm strategy go hand in hand. They follow each other, one after the other. Then you want to organize your data and your information, and then create those accountability mechanisms, not just for people to be assigned to the need more info links, but also for those of you who have intranets, people that are accountable for keeping content up to date. If you think about the very inclusive philosophy of, well, everybody has access to our intranet and our single source of truth, they'll just update it as it goes along. That's great in theory, but it's terrible in practice. Nobody follows that and keeps their intranet fully functioning, up to date, and relevant. And in order to create engagement and trust for collaboration, your intranet, your single source of truth, needs to be curated and it needs to be up to date so that people aren't engaging in the hunt and peck method of finding information, and the information that they're getting is up to date, which is highly important. The term that the phrase that I use all the time is, the fastest way to starve a dog is to assign 2 people to feed it. If you have everybody with access to your intranet and working toward the idea that everybody's going to update things as they go, you're going to have everybody on the left looking at everybody on the right, assuming that they're doing their updates, and everybody on the right looking at everybody on the left, assuming they're doing the updates, and nobody's going to be updating anything. This phrase applies to that feeding of the dog thing. If I think my husband is feeding the dogs, I'm not going to feed him. If he thinks I'm feeding the dogs, he's not going to feed them. Unfortunately, in my house, my 2 dogs are smarter than both of us, and they managed to get themselves fed twice. So there's that. The execution phase, elevate your teams and team members to create opportunities for visibility. Engage in a regular interview feature that is a staff spotlight, and make sure that the workers are elevated with a picture and they're both on your intranet and in your e-blast or your newsletter, so people can start seeing each other and understanding more about each other. You want them to be answering questions that aren't necessarily related to the job that they're doing right now. You want to ask questions about what is the problem that they solved that they're most proud of, or what type of work are they interested in, or what brought them to this industry, or did they have a favorite hobby when they were in high school. People will start to learn about each other, and they will more actively engage each other when you have those all staff meetings or those all staff parties, when they understand when they understand what somebody's about, and maybe when they understand what somebody looks like. It's a great way to break the ice before you actually gather everybody in the same room. Create culture within the larger community. Think of community as the umbrella with lots of cultures underneath. And if the example for that is, if I work in marketing, my culture is way different than the culture in IT. Or if I work in Lansing, Michigan, that hub is going to have a way different culture than the hub in Miami, Florida. So you have a number of different smaller cultures underneath the community umbrella. And we talk about organizational or corporate culture, and sure, that makes sense. It's part of today's vernacular. But really, as you're thinking about it theoretically and strategically, you're thinking about building a community. The mission and vision and values that everybody operates under, that defines the community. It helps people self-select to apply for a job with you. It helps make you attractive to those job seekers. And if they understand the community that they're engaging in, they will also adopt the culture within which they work. And then for those of you who are tasked with trying to figure out what that all staff event is and make everybody happy at the same time, which we all know will never happen, here's your permission to pull back on that a little bit. Sure, you're probably always going to have a holiday party, but you don't need to have an all staff something every quarter or every month, because relationship development is not forced fun. That slide actually brings us into the engagement and collaboration phase. And I love this quote by Kevin Kruse. Employee engagement is the emotional commitment the employee has to the organization and its goals. That's super important to remember because it humanizes engagement. It takes it out of that idea that this is all just puzzle pieces that exist on their own and just engage each other to create the whole picture. It brings the human side of that in. It talks about the desire for the employee to invest of themselves within your organization, and the trust that it takes for them to bring innovative ideas to the table, and their desire to become a buddy or a mentor to others within the organization. This really brings it down to what are the individual drivers that make me want to participate with others and make this organization better. One of the tools that we suggest using, that we've seen a lot of really great outcomes for, is internal podcasting. This helps you reach your deskless workers immediately. If anybody's cringing and thinking, internal podcasting, super expensive or super long and a huge undertaking, take a step back, because the trend in podcasts now is more like micro learning. So they're usually 15 to 20 minutes, and they're easy to produce. All you need is a podcasting mic and a Zoom account. And for most of the platforms, you can upload content for free. If you have one individual that's super into this, you can make it part of their professional development, and they can undertake this project. The three ways that we've seen this deployed successfully, and I'll go from least awesome to most awesome, but they're all pretty awesome, is that the leadership or the CEO is the provider of all the content. They're talking about the strategic plan or the quarterly goals or the next project initiative, and it's always that leadership informing staff kind of model. The second way that we've seen this deployed and even more effectively is when staff has a voice in who the guest is. And they may be suggesting people who are, experts in the industry or somebody who's a thought leader in the area, but you're bringing external voices in to bring a fresh perspective and entertain a little bit along the way, keeping people engaged. And then the most effective way is very much like that staff spotlight. It's interviewing the people who do the work and allowing them a pedestal to talk about what they're good at, what they think is important, how to connect with them, what the appropriate collaborative opportunities would be to connect with them. Again, creating that relationship development within the organization that makes it easy for people to come out of their silo and work across departments. The bullet points on here are all very impressive and they're true. However, the bottom line for this is, especially because we're talking about deskless workers, you can capture your deskless workers with their earbuds on the train on the way to work with this, or on, driving to the supermarket. It is not fair to expect people who are installing solar panels all day out in the field and probably working off of a tablet or a phone to always have to read their information. First of all, Reading on a phone is terrible. The older I get, the worse it seems. Second, not everybody is a text learner for their content. So the ability to break it up and to share your information, to share your content in different ways really matters. So those deskless workers don't have to finish their long, hot, hard day and go home and log onto a computer to really see or activate the links, what it is that you're trying to share. They can listen to it and they can do two things at the same time. And that's helpful, and it shows that you value their time. If you purchase their time between 8 and 5, and they have to commute home and then start listening or reading at 7 p.m., that doesn't seem very equitable. So here's a way that you can address that and do it inexpensively and relatively easily, and build a lot of good vibes around it. Engaging new and hybrid workers. It's very much the same in some aspects, that internal podcasting may be helpful for them, but there's something that you want from these new and hybrid workers. If they're not your deskless people, you want them to feel engaged, even though they're, for lack of a better word, engaging in administrative work. The most impactful activity that we found over the last 3-some years is what we're calling work sprints. It may or may not be a word that everybody's familiar with, because it may or may not be a word that we've actually attached to an activity in today's zeitgeist, but it really means a hosted virtual workspace. And it's not about monitoring people and whether or not they're working. It's not about fannies and seats. It's about creating that water cooler or hallway talk opportunity in a virtual environment. For distributed organizations that you can't get everybody in the same place, geographic location, being able to do this online really matters. And here's why. So this work sprint is a regularly scheduled 2 or 3 hour meeting, Zoom meeting, in everybody's calendar. And people log on. You have as many people in the room as your Zoom membership will allow you to have. And people can turn off their mic and take a phone call. They can turn off their screen and do something different, but everybody's in the same place at the same time. That allows people to see each other and spark that moment where you need help from, if I need help from Sandy, I can say, Sandy, let's go into a breakout room and work through this problem. Or, I'm with Clarissa and we're working on a project in another breakout room. People have the opportunity to see each other, ask each other questions, be in the same space, though they're not actually in the same space. Most organizations that implement this see an incredible spike in their pride of employment scores during their engagement surveys. And they see higher productivity and better suggestions for innovative process improvement. So again, staff spotlight, video shorts to break up the way that you communicate, creating a mentor or buddy program. All of these are great ways to engage your new and your hybrid workers, creating the opportunity to build relationships. And really, it can start with something as easy as a work sprint, which is free. So what is the collaborative community? As I said before, collaboration does not equal forced fun. Collaborative communities are built on trust. Trust, like employees understanding that their peers are well trained, or that team member information is readily available to review and act on, or that leadership models collaborative behavior by reaching down beyond management to the people who do the jobs and frequently working on small projects together. When teams and employees see leadership doing that, it becomes a reality in their head that cross-communication, cross-department activities are encouraged. And it builds trust in leadership that if you get a request for a meeting with HR or leadership or the head of your team, it's not because you're in trouble. It's not necessarily because you're in trouble. It's because there's something that you have to offer to the organization as a whole, or the project that is important at the moment, and that you are a valued part of the team. So this all builds on the idea that we can reach out to each other and that it's actually really important that we do that. So encouraging collaboration with your single source of truth or your intranet, think of it as your one location with zero chaos. You want to leverage your knowledge repository. As I mentioned earlier, building portals that are specific to your teams with a description about what their success metrics are, what defines the work that they do, and who to contact in those organizations. Creating a learning library. It may be LinkedIn Learning that you have an account with and that gets pumped in, but also consider, if you're a Microsoft organization and here's a real life example. We have a client who the CEO does all of her project management in Planner. And she wanted to work with somebody in marketing. And this gal in marketing wasn't familiar with Planner, and she didn't know how to show up to this meeting and make it seamless. She knew she was going to show up to the meeting and probably have to ask a lot of questions. After we learned this story, we suggested that this client take all of the Microsoft app learning and video possible and add those as links within their learning library. So if you're a Microsoft or some other Office suite organization, make sure that the apps that are involved with that suite have links in your single source of truth so people can learn how to use them all. Because if you have a membership, there's free training available and you can just connect to it and you don't have to recreate the wheel. So this is some of the ways that you can leverage your knowledge repository if you have a single source of truth and or intranet. Ta-da! Here are the QR codes that I was discussing. The one on the left is for the asset bundle, and it will cover all of the tools that I introduced today. And then if you want to talk about what we have covered in more detail and you just want to have a one-on-one, my scheduling QR code is here. I would welcome anybody to take me up on this. The purpose for me deploying this, at least first of workshops, is that right now we have a window. All of you, I think, are concerned about the fact that we want to make changes in the organization. We want to better our organizations. And right now we can. We have broken processes and rules and policies from the pandemic. And it's not going to be too long before we start getting rigid processes and rules. In this middle time, we can build what we need in order for our people to be successful, to increase our engagement, to increase job satisfaction scores, to improve our internal communications. And since I told you, they're all interconnected, they're all interrelated, this is an ecosystem. People in my position or the position of the people on my team who have this information, we need to be sharing it with you. If you choose to DIY it, you need to have the best practices and the tools that you can do this successfully. And we want you to have them. Because if you look at the environment right now with all the movement in the labor unions and the Great Resignation, it doesn't have to be that way. And our staffs and our employees and our workforces know that. They're eager for a new solution. We can help you do that. We can help you do it as a client. We can help you do it as a friend. But if you need resources or you need guidance, please feel free to reach out, because it's important to me to be able to be that resource for you. And with that, let's take some questions. Lindsay, did we get anything in the chat? I can't see it from my view. If you help me out. Okay.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm curious about one of the last points that you were talking about, scheduling time, putting it on the calendar for the collaborative work with your team. Is this just like time that you put on there and like everyone is on a team together and you don't necessarily have to have an agenda? Just you can address things like this morning I had a staff member who couldn't get into her password security, and she's like struggling and things. So I guess could you give me a little bit more about like, have you done this? How does this work? Like, are you, because we take phone calls, we answer emails, and there's a lot of different activity during our jobs during the day, but I could see the benefit with, I have team members at different levels, right? Some more experienced, some less experienced. And I could see the benefit of, instead of trying to chat a question, of, hey, are you on here? Can you help me with such and such? Is that the idea?
Yes, that is the idea. A work sprint is everybody in the organization or your team, depending on what level of decision making or authority you have to execute this. Everyone's invited, and they can do their work. They're just there. They can ask you questions. People can interact in whatever way they would. Think of a bullpen. When everybody was in the office, we all just sat around and did our work, and we had people around us and we didn't necessarily engage with them, but when we wanted to, we could. And you're creating that environment online.
So do you run into team members or staff who are just like, I hate this, I don't want to do this, this is ridiculous? And like, how do you deal with those who have the negative attitude towards that type of?
To be honest, if we deploy this with a client or an organization, after the second or third time, we don't have any pushback.
Okay.
It's people see the benefit of it, especially when it's when the initial invitation or the initial concept is delivered with some really specific points involved. This is not about monitoring you. This is about your ability to collaborate. This is not difficult. If you're going to be, on the road doing something different, don't log in from your phone. This is just for the purpose of replicating an office environment in a virtual setting.
Perfect. So a little different. Make sure that we're presenting it different than like a staff meeting that you're required, or the updates
Exactly.
and things.
It is no staff meeting. It is not meant to be utilized to inform or talk about goals or anything like that.
It's just like the kids during their Zoom class. I'm sorry, my kid had to do Zoom during COVID, right? Like they're all just sitting there together doing their thing. And it's kind of that's what I picture in my mind.
Yes. And they're all 12.
Yes, they're all 12. Doesn't matter how old they are. They're all 12. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Jackidra. I'll come off no video for a moment. In your, I think it was your first slide, you had the different things from the survey you did before the event. Silos was one of the impediments. Was the information shared there? Was it about silos across teams, silos within teams, maybe a little bit of both? Can you share more about what people said about silos?
It's a little bit of both. Answers that first or last part of your question. Most of it seemed to be revolving around the fact that there was information hoarding, that people weren't comfortable either sharing information or felt as though they were left out of information. So what we want to create in some silo busting is a collaborative mindset and an understanding that successful teams and successful processes involve informing people in the way that they need and thoroughly. So, if you have someone who is bent on hoarding information and not sharing, that's almost more of a management issue than it is an information distribution issue. But you can approach that person with the benefit of the doubt and teach them why it's important that the information be shared and how to include people in on the right conversations. Am I getting to what you're aiming at?
I guess I don't know the survey results. So yeah, if that's what you saw, yeah, that's and what you explained, I can get that, the hoarding of information, the not sharing, the not being in the know. So yep, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any thoughts on the information hoarding, how to encourage like a staff member? I think I run into either not knowing that they should share something, just not, like their mind doesn't work that way, right? Like this is something that would benefit everyone. They just take it, oh, like I got this and I need to do such and such with it. And so any ideas or any thoughts how to, and I mean, maybe this comes from, like you said, defining what like channels you use, like defining this, but any thoughts on how to help people to understand this isn't something I should hoard, this is something that should be shared?
I can see that question taking us down a couple different paths, because I don't know if this is operational information or if it's kind of cultural information, or if they're, updating slides and theirs are better than the originals. So maybe we should have a conversation that kind of gets into that detail offline. However, the overriding advice that I would give that could probably apply to everyone is that as we're having this conversation now, if your leadership is open to focusing on improved internal communication or improved collaboration and engagement, being able to spend some time sharing with and talking to and about how the organization fits together. It may be an all staff, it may be filtering down to the management level, and then the management level having that conversation with their teams, but really talking about, what does this organization stand for? What do we want and expect from our team members? And why is it important that you do this? I think that every organization can probably have a refresher on that, considering there's been a lot of new hire activity over the last 18 months. And that might benefit some people and nudge them in the right direction.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions specifically on any slides?
I have a question in regards to the internal communication and what information to share. So like when you're creating this plan, internal communication plan you'd mentioned, do you have any advice on, specific topics to focus on and to not focus on? So there was one of the slides spoke to enhancing, right, the diversity and inclusion aspect of the culture. So we send out a lot about, when we have holidays, why they're important, certain awareness months and things like that. But there's always difficulty, especially like with war and political issues that affect our employees, deciding or knowing which topics to speak to and which ones not. Do you have any advice on that?
It sounds like this is almost a culture issue where that curiosity piece may play a big role. Finding out if the overall community, if the culture of the organization sustains that type of information. There are organizations that choose not to have any statement on cultural or geopolitical issues because they find that it impacts their team in a negative way. Their teams didn't sign up to work for an organization that does that. Then there are other organizations that if you don't share that information, people are absolutely dumbfounded and think that you're completely tone deaf. So if you don't know the tolerance within your organization for sharing that kind of information, I would suggest starting out by finding out what the ecosystem will withstand. And make sure that this conversation, after you have the data, includes leadership, because leadership may have some really strong, thoughts on whether or not that information gets shared. And the impact of that, if you come to a kind of a detente between what the people want, what leadership wants, that's going to take some nuancing. And it may be that overall the mission, vision, and values of the organization have changed, and the people who work there no longer feel aligned with it. It may be that over the hybrid or remote work period since the pandemic, teams don't feel included in the messaging. So if they had a voice, they might tolerate some of the stuff that they didn't expect better. This would be a process that would take a while, but you would absolutely be able to hit the right tone with the messaging that you want to deploy. But it takes understanding who you're talking with in order to do that.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions? We've got a few minutes left. Well, I hope that you all enjoyed this. I am really grateful that you all participated, and I'm going to say thank you. We will be distributing the link to the recording, and we will also be distributing the tools. If you didn't get a chance to snap a picture of the QR code. And I really do look forward to some deeper dive conversations that go into the details and kind of segment out this information. I'm grateful that you shared your perspective with me beforehand so that we could do a high level overview today. And happy Wednesday. I hope that the rest of your week is wonderful. Enjoy your afternoon.